Hey friends, it's Gloria and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about the books that I have brought into my home, a book haul for you. Really all the books that I've acquired since my last book haul. I have over 40 books to share with you today, which is quite a bit. Some of these I got for Christmas and it was going to be a much smaller book haul, but then I went to a used bookstore and just went a bit rogue and added about another 20 to the list. Anyways, regardless, as usual in my book hauls and with my wrap-ups, I like to categorize by genre or theme as much as I can. So that's what I have for you today. As always, with every haul and really any video, please let me know which of these you've read, which ones worked for you and didn't, what would you recommend, what would you prioritize. Like I said, I'm on the hunt for amazing reads in 2023 and I really hope that some of these will be it. So let's get into books. I'm going to start with classics, a few more to add to my collection, starting with The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. I do remember reading this in high school. I know the basic story. I love Easy A, which is a movie that's adapted from this original story, but now I have the book and I'd love to revisit it one day. Next, I picked up The Last Mohicans by James Fenimore Cooper. This is a classic that I've seen no one on BookTube talk about. This is a book that just hasn't been discussed, or maybe it's not included on many lists. Maybe it's just the people that I follow, but I really have not heard the general consensus on this book from the BookTube community I'm a part of, but I would love to broaden my horizons. This is set in the 1750s amongst the French and Indian Wars. It is supposed to be a historical romance and really action-packed. I'm not sure, but I'm intrigued, and let me know if you read it and what you thought about it. Now, I've said this in a few past videos. I'm not really a Shakespeare girl. I had to read some Shakespeare in school, and I never really enjoyed it. I think I maybe liked Macbeth, but the other ones were fine for me. So I found these in a little free library, you know, no harm done. We'll see if I ever want to pick them up. But Othello and Romeo and Juliet. I've read Romeo and Juliet in school. I've never read Othello. Couldn't tell you what it's about. I don't know. Should I read some Shakespeare? I feel like I'll be back in school if I do, and trying to like analyze it and understand what's going on. These are the editions that like break down the books from SparkNotes, which is actually the website I used in school to help me understand Shakespeare. So anyways, we'll see. We'll see. They'll just sit there and I'll look at them and maybe I'll give them away one day if I'm not drawn to them. Next, I picked up The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. Sadly, an author that I have not read from before, and I would really like to remedy that. I've heard fantastic things about her. I know this story isn't for everyone and I feel like it might not be for me. I feel like it's literary and a bit dark. I've just heard interesting things, but not necessarily stuff that I might enjoy in my reading. But I feel like I'm doing myself a disservice of not trying a Toni Morrison, so I will get to that hopefully this year. Continuing to pick up books out of my comfort zone, I found The Complete Stories of Flannery O'Connor. I'm not a short story gal, but this is a beautiful book and it was $1. It is Flannery O January, which is a readathon happening where people read Flannery O'Connor. I don't know if I'm gonna at all connect with this writing. I know she's a Southern author and some people love her, like Tiffany from Beautiful Minutia, and some people don't. I have no idea where I stand, so maybe I will try to read a short story in January just to see how that goes. And finally, for classics, I was gifted this by the lovely Miriam from Miriam Elizabeth Reads. I won one of her giveaways, which I never win things, so that was very exciting, and that was Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier. I read Rebecca, absolutely loved it. I read My Cousin Rachel, it was fine. I've heard great things about Jamaica Inn, and everyone is reading this in January and February for the FOMO book club, so I hope to read this very, very soon. This next one is probably still a classic, but it's children's, so I'm moving into the small children's category that I have. But I'm talking about The Borrowers by Mary Norton. I feel like I read this when I was a kid and I really loved it. Again, I found this really old copy from the 60s. I'd love to revisit the story. If I'm remembering correctly, it's about a family that lives in a shoe. I've never seen really any movies that I can recall or anything like that, but this one was a fun find. Another one that's very nostalgic for me, I remember absolutely loving this when I was in elementary school. I feel like the story really stuck with me, and that was Things Not Seen by Andrew Clements. I feel from what I recall is about a boy who uses a heated electric blanket and then becomes invisible, and he can't be seen by anyone and no one knows where he went. And I remember being so afraid to use heated electric blankets because of the story, which is funny because I use my heated blanket like every day now because I'm always cold. I feel like that's what I remember about this book, but I don't know, I'd love to revisit this as well. Before we get into my big old piles of nonfiction and historical, which is usually the case of the books that I haul, I have a stack of random miscellaneous contemporary books, some being just plain contemporary, some being literary, some being mysteries, and a little YA. Starting off with Apples Never Fall by Liane Moriarty. I really enjoy Liane Moriarty's writing. I've read 3 of her books. She has a very extensive backlist, so would love to dive into all of them. This one was one of her newest books, Apples Never Fall, that came out a couple years ago, and I've not really heard great things about it. Like, no one raved about it. A lot of people thought it was just fine, maybe a little too long, but it's an author I really like, so I would love to give this one a try as well. Another really beloved contemporary author is Jodi Picoult. This is Plain Truth, and I read my first Jodi Picoult last year, The Storyteller, and that was a historical fiction. It was an overall pretty solid historical fiction. This one is a contemporary story about an Amish family, something like that. It was quite highly rated on Goodreads, so I thought I would give it a try. The next one is The Chemist by Stephanie Meyer. She's obviously the well-known author of the Twilight series, which I read and loved as a teenager. I also remember really loving reading The Host, which I have, and I never read The Chemist. This is an adult mystery thriller. I have really no idea what it's about. Not sure how it's gonna go, but I found it and I want to give it a try. And finally, for this miscellaneous category, I picked up Bridge of Clay by Marcus Zuzak. This was a signed copy. Yeah, he signed the book and I found it for 50 cents. So I thought I would snag it up. I really loved The Book Thief. That's one of my favorite historical fiction books that I would love to reread because it's been years. I read I'm the Messenger. I think I liked it overall. From my understanding of the brief perusal of the flap, this is a young adult story about a family and a son and brotherhood. But I also have not heard the greatest things. You know, a lot of people just thought this was fine. Not as good as his most well-known book, but I couldn't pass it up for 50 cents. Next, let's talk about some non-fiction that I picked up. First one is West with the Night by Beryl Markham. This is about a female pilot in Africa. I just know that it's on my want to read list in Goodreads. I can't remember where I first heard about this book and why it ever got onto my to read list, but I love a good memoir. Speaking of memoirs, I have a couple that I've already read and absolutely loved, and I'm so excited to add to my collection. The first one being My Life in France by Julia Child. This is just a delightful read, especially if you at all love cooking or are fond of watching the Food Network channel back in the day. This is a lovely book about an incredible woman, and what a cool story that she had and how she absolutely changed and revolutionized the culinary field. Another one that I loved so much it became a favorite of my non-fictions in 2021, and that was Will by Will Smith. This is his life story about his family and growing up and his different loves and relationships, working in the music industry and as an actor. The production of the audiobook was absolutely incredible. One of the best audiobook experiences. I don't know what he's up to these days, but I really enjoyed reading this book. The next one is not one that I've read, but one I would love to read, and that is Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela. I honestly did not ever learn about this man in school. Unfortunately, just a subject in my schooling at least, we did not learn about South Africa, apartheid, or this great man and his story and how he was imprisoned. All the history of really South Africa that I'm unfamiliar with. I've read Born a Crime by Trevor Noah and Hum If You Don't Know the Words by Bianca Murray, and those are both fantastic books, giving a slight glimpse of what South Africa is like. But this one I'd love to get to someday, even though it's a big old book, but it will be great, I'm sure. Next up, I have two books on Russia. The first one being The Endless Steppe by Esther Hautzig. This is about June 1941, and the Rudimon family were arrested by the Russians and sent to the Gulag. So like many families and people that were sent to Siberia to work in labor camps and try to survive horrible conditions. On a very similar vein, the next one is In the Land of White Death, an epic story of survival in the Siberian Arctic by Valerian Albanov. This one is not about surviving a gulag, but actually about a Russian exploration vessel that was frozen and broken down and trapping a crew on board in 1912, and they struggled to stay alive for a year and a half, I think, before anyone was able to rescue and find them. This was originally published in Russia in 1917 and was translated in English for the first time. So I almost feel like this is a nonfiction Russian classic, maybe? I don't know, but I would love to learn more, and John Krakauer blurbed it, and I have had success reading him recently, so we'll see how this one goes. Another one that's about disasters that's a little bit closer to home is Eruption, The Untold Story of Mount St. Helens by Steve Olson. Mount St. Helens is just a few miles away, right next to Portland, Oregon, across the river on the Washington side, and it did erupt in the 1980s. It was an active volcano, and it obviously killed a lot of people and destroyed a lot of homes. So this is that story, and I would love to learn more about my regional history because I wasn't alive when this happened. This next one is such a sweet little book, How to Be in Moonflower, a field guide by Katie Daisy. Katie Daisy is a lovely illustrator and painter. I actually have a few of her paintings in my guest room, but this is like a coffee table artsy book. It is just full of beautiful illustrations and just fun little whimsy, and I found it in a little free library in perfect brand new condition. So this is one that I will happily have on my coffee table and just peruse through, but it's absolutely lovely and would make a really great gift. And finally, for nonfiction, one to add to my very long and growing honeybee collection is The Life and Times of the Honeybee by Charles Micucci. This is a library discard, quite an old book I found in a little free library, but it is so cute, and I will definitely keep it around and, like I said, add to my collection because I collect books on bees and honey and all that kind of stuff, and it's fun to find books on the topic. Moving on to historical fiction, but staying on the honey and bee theme, I have The Beekeeper of Aleppo by Christy Lefturi. This is a book that I have been meaning to read. I'm so happy that I found it. This is a beautiful edition, and the main characters in the story, I believe, are Syrian refugees who moved to the UK, and it is their story and their past and their history. I've heard fantastic things, and I'm definitely lacking in exposure to understanding the Syrian refugee experience and the recent history there, so I'm so happy to add this book to my collection and hopefully read it soon. I got 2 lovely books for Christmas. The first one being The Other Bennett Sister by Janice Hadlow. Literally have heard nothing but 5-star glowing reviews for this book. This is promised to be an amazing experience for anyone that loves Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, because this is kind of a retelling from a different character's perspective and really like a sequel, almost a continuation of the story. I can't wait to dive in. The next one I was gifted was West with Giraffes by Linda Routledge. This is a historical fiction that sounds really intriguing to me, so much so that I added it on my 23 books to read in 2023. This is set during the Dust Bowl Great Depression era, about the first giraffes that go to the San Diego Zoo, and it's promised to be part adventure, part historical saga, part coming of age love story. These next 4 all have to do with like Revolutionary or Civil War or colonial America. I guess I'm just kind of in the mood to read some of that. The first 2 are by the same author duo. Stephanie Dre and Laura Kamoe wrote My Dear Hamilton, which is the story of Eliza Schuyler Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton's wife, and also America's first daughter. From Monticello to Jefferson's White House, she shaped the legacy of a nation. This is about Thomas Jefferson's oldest daughter, Patsy Jefferson. I have never read from this author duo. I haven't heard much about these stories, but I read a book last year, A Well-Behaved Woman, about Alva Vanderbilt, and I really loved that historical perspective of reading about a singular female character, a historical figure, and what she did with her life. Both of these seem to be that kind of experience. The other one I have is The Widow of the South by Robert Hicks. This is set in 1860s during the Civil War, about a woman who owns a plantation, and there are some very bloody and intense battles that happened on the grounds of her plantation, I believe. Maybe something along those lines, I'm not sure, but I see a lot of people have this book who love historical fiction. Don't know if they read it or not, but I'm intrigued. And finally, I have A Flight of the Sparrow. This is set during the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1676, and it's about a woman who is captured by the Indians, and it also touches on like the early Puritan movement as well. So this one also sounds really interesting to me. It doesn't have the highest rating on Goodreads, but I'm intrigued. I have 9 books that all cover very miscellaneous time periods and are all over the place, but I do have 4 that all have to do with World War II. The first one is The Historians by Cecilia Ekbach. This is set in 1943 in Sweden. A young woman's best friend dies, and she decides to investigate her murder or what happened to her, and gets involved in the war somehow. Atonement by Ian McEwan. This is a very popular author and story. I have watched the movie. It's been years. I don't remember details. I do remember it being absolutely sad and tragic. Like, it broke my heart, and this is probably gonna break my heart as well. I think mostly people like this one. Maybe some people don't. We'll see where I sit with it. The next one is A Country Road, A Tree by Jo Baker. So Jo Baker is the author of Longbourn, which is a Pride and Prejudice retelling that I would love to read. I did try her book, The Body Lies, which is a really creepy thriller that I had to DNF. But this is set in 1939 in Paris, and this is a story of survival, determination, spies and artists, passion and danger. I don't know if I'm gonna like it, but it's short and I want to give this author another try. And what I thought was a World War II was actually not. It is called Girl at War by Sarah Novick, and the war that's mentioned in this title is the Civil War in Yugoslavia. So that is definitely a perspective I have not read from before, and I'm intrigued how that goes. The next book is Unsheltered by Barbara Kingsolver. I read the Poisonwood Bible in 2022 and really enjoyed my time with it. It was so beautifully written, so I'm very intrigued to try more from this author. I couldn't tell you what this is about. It's probably a family story, because I think that's what she tries to unpack in her writing, but I do want to give another one of her books a try. This next one also made it on my 23 books to read in 2023, and then literally the next day after filming that video, I found this at a used bookstore, The Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes. This is a very beloved, hyped historical fiction about the Packhorse Library and the Appalachia area in the US, and I want to see what all the fuss is about. This next one I kind of regret buying. It's definitely a book that I could have just checked out from the library when I wanted to read it, but it is Miss Benson's Beetle by Rachel Joyce. This book, I love the cover. I first was super intrigued to read this, and then I've heard kind of mixed reviews. Some people think it was just fine, some people really liked it, but then I came to a realization at the end of 2022 is that I most likely do not like books with main characters' names in the title, specifically contemporary books and maybe some historical fiction. This is historical fiction. It's set in 1950s, and this is a story of friendship. Two very quirky women, maybe unlikely friends, go on this journey and expedition to discover a rare beetle, something along those lines. I don't know how I'm gonna fare with it. Probably didn't need to buy it, but now it's on my shelves and I'll get to it someday. This next one, spoiler, I just finished reading it and really enjoyed my time with it, surprisingly. The Snow Child by Ewan Ivey. This was on my winter TBR. I am so happy that I picked it up. What a beautiful, atmospheric, cozy read about the Alaskan wilderness and a family story. Also, unexpectedly, this is a retelling of a Russian folktale, so that was a really nice surprise. Another one I probably didn't need to buy, but can't help myself. The Downstairs Girl by Stacey Lee. This is a young adult historical fiction. I really only trust Ruta Sepetys with young adult historical fiction, but I do want to branch out and try some other authors. This one is set in the 1890s in Atlanta, and this author has written some other books. I've seen this book around quite a bit. Obviously, it's on Reese's YA book club, so we'll see how I fare with some other YA historical fiction. This next one is categorized as historical fiction and literary fiction in Goodreads, and I was always so intrigued by this beautiful cover when I saw it in bookstores, and that is Even As We Breathe by Annette Sanook Clapsaddle. The author is Indigenous, and this is a story about a woman who returns to her hometown in Cherokee, North Carolina, right as World War II is raging in Europe. I'm not sure on other details of how the stories weave together, but this cover is beautiful and I would really love to give it a try. I'm the sucker for the color yellow, and this one caught my eye. Song of a Captive Bird by Jasmine Darznik. This was a library discard, and I saved this book from going in the garbage. The librarian was reading and it was going to throw it away, and I was like, hey, I'll take that home. And all I can tell you is that this is set in the 1950s in the summer in Tehran, Iran. This next one, so out of my comfort zone. I picked it up only because of this beautiful cover. We the Drowned by Karsten Jensen. Look at this beautiful cover. Now, out of my comfort zone because I don't really care about books that are set like at sea or have to do with ships. That is why I never plan on reading Moby Dick, because nothing about that sounds like an interesting classic to me. This is a story that is set in a port town in Denmark and about different voyages of different ships. I think this is expansive and maybe multiple characters, multiple timelines, that kind of thing. Please tell me if you've read it, but I just couldn't pass up this beautiful cover. I have absolutely no idea how I'm gonna fare with it. And then ending on a book that I was excited to find because it's an author that I can't wait to try. And this is The Winter Sea by Susanna Kearsley. This is also compared to Outlander, and people who love Outlander is set in the 1700s in Scotland. I think an aspect of time travel might be involved, but I am a fan of Outlander, so if there are more books that are kind of like it or giving me the vibes, then I'm all for it, and I've heard great things about Susanna Kearsley. So that is my big old stack of books that I'm adding to my shelves. Let me know what you think if you read any of them, and thank you so much for watching today. I will see you guys in another video soon. Bye!